The president said she should be in jail. Jasmine Crockett picked up a highlighter, went live, and by the next morning, half the country had her back. The room wasn't packed, but the tension made it feel like the walls were closing in. Reporters leaned in with pens gripped like weapons, cameras blinked under the hot lights, and the air inside the White House briefing room felt heavier than usual. President Trump stepped up to the podium, face tight, voice sharp. He was already agitated. Something about the tone told people in the room this wouldn't be a routine press conference. He shuffled the papers in front of him, skipped over the opening remarks, and went straight for the jugular. Without naming her at first, he started talking about a radical member of Congress who had, in his words, openly encouraged rebellion and was spreading lies about my executive order to rig the voting system for minorities. It didn't take long before he said her name, slow and loud. Jasmine Crockett, he said, should be investigated for sedition. Frankly, she should be jailed. A hush fell over the room like someone had slammed a door on a conversation. The reporters blinked. Some glanced at each other in confusion. Others immediately began typing. The president had just publicly threatened a sitting congresswoman with jail time for criticism. Someone in the second row stammered a question. "Mr. President, are you saying you'll instruct the DOJ to—" Trump cut them off. "We're looking into it. She's dangerous. She's inciting division at a time when we need unity. People like that can't be allowed to just say whatever they want and think there won't be consequences." Some staffers behind him shifted uncomfortably. The tension wasn't just on the floor. Even among the White House crew, the atmosphere was rattled. Outside the room, the clip spread like wildfire. Within 10 minutes, it was already clipped and shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The thumbnail, Trump's face frozen mid-sentence with a red banner under it reading, "Threatens jail for Crockett." Inside her district office in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett was already watching. Her team had texted her the moment his words hit the feed. She stood behind her desk, arms crossed, watching in silence. "Play it again," she said quietly. Her chief of staff hesitated, then hit replay. She listened to the whole thing again. Her expression didn't change. She didn't pace, didn't raise her voice. But something inside her changed. This wasn't just politics anymore. This wasn't a jab across the aisle. It was an attempt to intimidate her publicly. And she knew if she stayed quiet, it wouldn't stop there. Her press aide whispered, "We need to respond, right away." Jasmine nodded. "We will, but not like they expect." Phones started ringing. The media wanted a statement. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. Commentators were already screaming at each other on live television. Some called Trump's remarks unprecedented. Others said Crockett was being reckless and race-baiting. By the end of the day, her name was mentioned in more than 200 news segments. Talk radio had it on repeat. Political Twitter exploded. At a local bar in Oklahoma City, a man watching the headline on the screen shook his head. "They're gonna lock her up," he muttered. A woman next to him answered, "They're scared of her, that's all." Back in Dallas, Jasmine looked over at her aide. "We'll go live tomorrow. No press filter. Just me. My words. Let them hear me directly." The aide blinked. "Facebook? YouTube?" "All of it." She turned off the TV, picked up her phone, dialed her mother. "Mama," she said calmly. "You saw it?" Her mother's voice trembled slightly on the other end. "I did. You okay, baby?" "I'm good," Jasmine replied, "but this just became something bigger than me." But that wasn't the part that shocked the country. It was what she said the next day that flipped everything upside down. 3 days earlier, Jasmine Crockett had stood in front of a modest crowd outside a courthouse in Fort Worth, Texas. She wore a gray blazer, black slacks, and a sharp look in her eye that said she wasn't there to smile for cameras. Behind her, posters read, "Protect our vote," and "We remember Selma." There were no national news outlets there, just a few local reporters and a couple of community organizers holding their breath as she leaned into the microphone. "The president's latest executive order," she began, "is not about election security. It's about voter suppression, plain and simple." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It targets cities with high Black and Latino turnout. It shifts polling sites to areas that are inaccessible, and it hands federal power to state officials who've already shown they'll do anything to rig the map in their favor." She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her words were clean, sharp, deliberate, and they landed. The executive order in question had been signed just a day earlier. On paper, it called for the federal streamlining of election security protocols, a name that sounded neutral enough. But buried in the fine print were restrictions on ballot drop boxes, limitations on early voting hours, and provisions that allowed federal observers to be placed in high-risk districts, a vague term that, coincidentally, applied almost exclusively to neighborhoods with large Black, Hispanic, and Native populations. Jasmine read the whole thing line by line. Then she read it again. Her background as a civil rights attorney meant she saw things others missed. Subtle phrasing, quiet landmines. One clause, in particular, jumped out at her. In the event of civic disruption or verified misinformation campaigns, the federal government may suspend or relocate voting stations as needed to preserve order. She stared at that line for an hour before speaking out. This gives them the power to move a voting center out of a Black neighborhood because someone tweets a false rumor, she told her chief of staff. That's not oversight. That's control. She gave it to a journalist she trusted, Ariana Liu from the Dallas Morning Record. Ariana published it the same night. By morning, Crockett's speech outside the courthouse had made its rounds. It wasn't front-page news, but it was spreading. Political TikTok picked it up. A few law professors reposted it. Civil rights groups were reviewing the language in the order and issuing statements of concern. But Jasmine didn't stop there. She requested a public review of the order's legality and began organizing with other lawmakers behind the scenes. Representatives like Owen Jeffries from Michigan and Lena Serrano from Arizona joined her. Quietly, a coalition was forming. They met virtually the night before Trump's press conference. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a notepad filled with bullet points. Owen looked exhausted. Lena was angry. "We're not going to get support from the Senate," Owen said, "not unless something big happens." "Then we make it big," Jasmine said, "not with noise, with facts." That's when she told them what she found. 2 leaked internal emails she had received from a whistleblower in the Department of Justice. One of them instructed federal attorneys to ensure compliance with the president's agenda in managing voting station locations. The other mentioned Jasmine by name, calling her a rising threat to administrative unity. She hadn't released them yet. She wanted to be strategic, but seeing Trump's rage on camera the next day made the decision for her. That order wasn't written for national security, she would later say on her live stream. It was written to keep certain people from voting, and the emails prove it. But in that moment, just after the press conference, most Americans still didn't know any of this. They only saw a congresswoman called out and threatened by the sitting president. Some were terrified, others were curious. But for a small, growing group, something clicked. They remembered past suppression. They remembered voices silenced not by guns, but by redistricting lines and legal loopholes. And this felt too familiar. But Crockett wasn't just fighting back. She was preparing to break the silence in a way no one expected. She didn't wait for prime time. At 9:08 a.m. the following morning, Jasmine Crockett went live across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X, broadcasting from the corner of her district office in Dallas. No flashy graphics, no filter, no background music, just her, sitting at a plain desk, her phone angled slightly up. She wore a navy blouse and light makeup, her hair tied back. She looked serious, not rattled. "Good morning," she began calmly. "I want to speak directly to the people who elected me, and to anyone else who's wondering why the President of the United States just threatened me on national television." The live stream had just under 1,000 viewers at first, mostly from her district, but within 3 minutes, the number jumped past 10,000. By the time she was halfway through, more than 500,000 people were watching. "I'm not scared," she said plainly, "but I am angry, and you should be too." She leaned forward slightly, voice steady. "The president said I should be jailed for inciting civil unrest. Let me tell you what I actually did." Then she laid it out, step by step. She described the executive order, pulled out printed pages from the document, and held them up to the camera. She read aloud the part that concerned her most, pointing to each word with a highlighter. "This," she said, tapping the clause, "allows the government to shut down a polling location in any Black or brown neighborhood if someone posts a fake tweet about a fight at the polling station. Think about that." She paused. Then she picked up her phone, opened her email, and shared her screen. "I want you to see this." 2 emails. One from a Department of Justice official telling staff to maintain enforcement in favor of executive interest. Another referencing her directly, Raquel Crockett is rallying opposition prematurely. She's a disruption to administrative unity. She let the silence sit for a moment. Y'all, this isn't oversight, it's suppression. This isn't about unity, it's about control. She wasn't yelling. Her voice was clear and cool, like someone telling you something they've been thinking about for a long time. Like someone who already made peace with the risk. We are standing at the edge of something dangerous, she said, looking straight into the camera. And I'm not here to back down. I've faced worse than a man yelling on TV. A staffer behind the camera signaled to her. 15 minutes had passed, but she wasn't done. She ended the video by addressing the president directly. You said I'm dangerous. You're right, but not for the reason you think. I'm dangerous to lies. I'm dangerous to silence. And if you're scared of me speaking truth, good, because I'm not stopping. She tapped the screen to end the live stream, and just like that, it was out in the world. Within the hour, #StandWithJasmine was trending across every major platform. Civil rights groups started resharing clips. Dozens of attorneys began commenting on the language in the executive order. College students reposted her words with hashtags. Her email inbox was flooded with offers of legal support, partnership, and media requests. But what made it real wasn't any of that. It was the comments. A man from Columbus, Ohio. My grandmother was stopped from voting in 1962. I never thought I'd see this again. I stand with you. A woman from Mesa, Arizona. Thank you for reading it out loud. I'm a mother of 2, and I had no idea the clause existed. I'm sharing this with everyone I know. A teenager from Minneapolis. You made me care about politics today. That's something. She sat back in her chair. No cheering, no applause, just a long exhale. Her aide looked over. That was different. Jasmine turned toward her slowly. Now let's see who has the courage to speak next. But it wasn't just the people who responded. Someone inside the White House had been watching closely, and they weren't happy. The first ripple appeared in a coffee shop in Boise, Idaho. A barista named Lacey propped her tablet on the espresso machine and replayed Jasmine's live stream while the morning line built. By the time she finished steaming the last latte, half the customers were leaning in to watch. An older man in a denim jacket asked Lacey to turn up the volume. A college kid in a green cap typed on his phone, eyes wide. A mother with a stroller murmured, "This can't be legal." The video ended, but nobody moved for a few seconds. Then someone clapped. Lacey didn't know who started it, only that it spread, soft but steady, until the whole shop joined in. 1,000 miles away, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a retired teacher named Gloria sat at her kitchen table and forwarded the clip to her former students. She paired it with a short note. History's knocking. Pay attention. 20 replies came back within an hour, each carrying a screenshot of them sharing it onward. Online, the hashtag #StandWithJasmine vaulted past celebrity gossip and sports scores in under 4 hours. It wasn't the polished influencers who pushed it. It was teachers, grocery clerks, nursing aides, high school seniors. Folks who didn't usually comment on politics posted the clip alongside short, raw notes. My dad marched in Birmingham. I see the same playbook. Voting shouldn't feel like a gamble. I don't even like politics, but threatening a rep for speaking? Nah. Traditional outlets scrambled to keep pace. MSNBC looped the live stream highlights between weather segments. CNN sent a producer to Dallas before lunch. Even a radio show in Helena, Montana, known more for cattle prices than Congress, opened with a segment titled The Crockett Clash. By late afternoon, streets were filling up. In Lansing, Michigan, nearly 200 people gathered outside the State House with hand-painted signs that read, "Dissent is not a crime," and "Protect the polls." No party banners, no megaphones, just voices chanting in measured cadence. A local reporter counted 8 ministers, 3 Vietnam veterans, and a handful of high school track athletes still in practice gear. In Tallahassee, Florida, a law student named Kareem organized a candlelight march around the old Capitol building. He expected maybe 30 friends and classmates. Instead, close to 600 showed. They walked 2 slow laps, candles flickering against the limestone columns. When a police cruiser idled nearby, no one scattered. They kept walking, shoulders squared, candles held high. Jasmine watched footage from her office, phone propped against a water bottle. Her communications director, Patrice, leaned over her shoulder. "They're everywhere," Patrice whispered. "Everywhere." Jasmine just nodded, voice low. "Let them see each other." And they did. Live streams in Eugene, Oregon featured handmade banners. A drone shot from Shreveport, Louisiana showed a ribbon of people snaking peacefully through downtown, singing "This Little Light of Mine." In Bismarck, North Dakota, where protests rarely crack 100, locals formed a quiet circle outside the courthouse and read sections of the Voting Rights Act aloud, one person at a time. Cable hosts argued over whether this counted as civil unrest or civil defense. One analyst on a national morning show warned that gatherings could turn rowdy, yet footage on social media painted a different picture. Families pushing strollers, retirees leaning on canes, college bands playing brass standards. The mood felt less like a riot and more like a collective deep breath. Still, tension simmered beneath the calm. In Madison, Wisconsin, a counter-demonstrator waved a sign that read, "Lock her up." A veteran with a red ball cap shouted at a teenager streaming on his phone, calling the protests fake outrage. Police separated them quickly, but the clip racked up 2 million views within hours, feeding cable pundits hungry for conflict. Back in Dallas, Jasmine drafted a thank you message, but paused halfway. Instead, she tweeted, "Keep it peaceful, keep it loud. I see you, and I'm not backing down." The post gathered 200,000 likes in 30 minutes. Phones inside the West Wing buzzed non-stop. A communications aide tried to downplay the trend, calling the protests small gatherings. The line didn't hold. Aides began fielding calls from governors, red and blue, asking whether federal observers would be deployed to cities on the executive order list. The question alone signaled trouble. If observers showed up, it would prove Jasmine's point. If they didn't, the order looked toothless. At a diner in Rapid City, South Dakota, a truck driver named Dean watched a news alert scroll across a mounted TV. White House reviews response after nationwide Crockett rallies. He set down his fork and muttered, "That's a first." Late that evening, civil rights attorney Wilhelmina Banks went on a local Memphis station and broke down the legal stakes. "Intimidation only works if you silence the target," she said into the camera, her voice calm. Congresswoman Crockett answered with sunlight. Sunlight spreads. The clip trended right behind Jasmine's original live stream for the rest of the night. By dawn, petitions demanding the executive order be suspended had crossed 3 million signatures. The numbers alone startled pollsters. Jasmine scrolled through the sign-up list until her eyes blurred. Clerks from Utah, nurses from Iowa, a librarian from Peoria. People far from the usual protest map. Patrice stepped into her office, holding a folder stuffed with interview requests. "They all want you. Today, tomorrow, yesterday, if possible," she said. Jasmine placed the phone on the desk and rubbed her temples. "Pick 2. One local, one national. If we talk everywhere, we speak nowhere." Patrice hesitated. "Roger that." But inside the White House, anxiety was turning into outright panic as advisors scrambled to control a fire they never saw coming. By the time President Trump walked into the Oval Office the next morning, 5 aides were already in a silent standoff. Phones buzzed on every surface. One of the flat screens on the wall was frozen on a protest scene from St. Louis, Missouri. Grandmothers holding signs, teenagers passing out water bottles, a young boy with a hand-painted poster that read, "Let her speak." "Turn that off," Trump said as he motioned toward the screen without looking at it. No one moved. He adjusted his tie and sat, then pointed at his chief strategist, Bennett Gorski, who was sweating through his dress shirt despite the air conditioning. "Why the hell is this still a story?" Bennett cleared his throat. "We expected a little noise, Mr. President, but the Crockett video, it caught fire. We underestimated her." Trump scoffed. "It's just another Democrat yelling about racism. That's their whole brand." "Sir, she didn't yell," said Karen Stroud, Deputy Communications Director. "That's what made it worse. She laid out everything calmly, read the order on air, held up DOJ emails. She sounded reasonable." Trump leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. "So hit her harder." There was a long pause. The Attorney General's liaison, a thin man named Rusk, finally spoke. "That might backfire again, Mr. President. The DOJ's already catching heat. There's chatter about launching an internal review of how the executive order was handled. Someone's leaking from inside." Trump's hand slapped the desk. "Find the leak." Already working on it, Bennett said quickly. The president's phone lit up. A notification from one of his preferred news channels read, "Protests expand after Crockett's live stream. Pressure builds on White House." He swiped it away and looked up, jaw clenched. She's one congresswoman. Why does it feel like we're losing the country to a woman with a webcam? No one had an answer, but behind closed doors, the math had changed. Several Republican governors had already made quiet calls, asking whether they were expected to enforce the new voting restrictions. Others had begun tiptoeing around press inquiries. Senator Arnold Marr from Wyoming issued a statement carefully avoiding the order altogether, saying only that all Americans have the right to question executive power. In short, the foundation was cracking. In a side office, Gorski met privately with Stroud. "We have to pivot," she told him. "This won't survive a second news cycle." "And say what?" he asked. "Say the order was about security. Clarify the language. Blame the confusion on Crockett misreading it." "She didn't misread anything." "She made it look that way," Stroud shot back. "You saw the live stream. That woman's got courtroom rhythm. You can't shout that down." Back in the Oval Office, Trump called for a second press conference. His legal advisor, Vaughn Little, advised against it. "Sir, your first remarks are already being dissected. If you double down, it gives the media another tape loop." "I want to be clear," Trump said. "She lied. She made it political. The protests are staged. We'll say that." The press secretary, Dwight Reynolds, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with all due respect, we might be better off letting the heat die down before you speak again." Trump glared. "I don't let things die down. I crush them." He canceled the morning's golf round and demanded an updated dossier on Jasmine Crockett. "She's smart," Gorski said. "Civil rights attorney, criminal defense background, served in the Texas House before Congress. Not much dirt. Some early campaign donations from labor groups, one Twitter spat with a radio host, but no real scandal." "She's got to have something," Trump snapped. "She's not afraid of you," Stroud said under her breath, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. But he heard. Trump's eyes narrowed. "Then make her afraid." Stroud stood silently, expression unreadable. The room felt colder. While that meeting dragged on, an aide in the West Wing kitchen took a moment to check her phone. A text from her sister read, "Did you see the new clip? The girl reading her grandma's voting card?" "I cried." She clicked the link. It was a teenage girl in New Orleans reading from her grandmother's 1965 voter registration card, tears in her eyes. "They told her she couldn't read, but she memorized the Constitution just to prove them wrong," the girl said. "And now someone wants to take us back?" That clip was already being stitched with Jasmine's video by influencers across social platforms. One edit showed Crockett holding the DOJ emails while the girl's voice played over it. That single mashup was reshared by celebrities, pastors, and even a former federal judge. At the same moment, Jasmine sat alone in her kitchen, stirring tea she wasn't drinking. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't shaken either. She looked at her calendar. There was a media slot open for tomorrow at 8 p.m., a national network that rarely invited her on. But they'd called twice. She stared at the time, picked up her phone. "Let's talk," she said into the voicemail. "But I don't want fluff. I want 20 minutes. No commercial break. We do this. We do it real." But the interview wouldn't just be real. It would become the moment that pulled the entire country into her corner. The studio lights weren't bright. That was intentional. The producers of Stateline Weekly, a long-running Sunday night political show based out of Los Angeles, wanted the interview to feel less like a debate and more like a living room conversation. Jasmine Crockett sat in a straight-back chair across from anchor Jonah Frank, a veteran journalist known for letting his guests speak without interruption, unless they started dodging. He wasn't partisan. He didn't need to be. His questions were sharper when he was quiet. The broadcast opened with a single camera angle. No dramatic music, no B-roll montage, just Jonah leaning in. "Congresswoman," he said, "the President of the United States suggested you be jailed. Have you received a direct threat since then?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "More than one," she said. "Some anonymous, one voicemail. They're all being reported, but threats aren't new. For women who speak plainly, they never are." Jonah nodded slowly. "You've sparked national protests. You've shown internal DOJ emails. But let's get to the core. Why do you think this executive order was crafted the way it was?" Jasmine took a breath, not dramatic, just steady. Because suppressing a vote is easier than changing a policy, she replied. Because if you shift just 5,000 votes in 3 counties, you don't need to win hearts. You just win margins. She held up a laminated document, her marked-up copy of the executive order. I'm not guessing. I read the thing. I highlighted the line where they allow polling stations to be relocated due to civil unrest. I highlighted the memo that calls my public objection a disruption. They didn't even hide the motive that well. The studio camera panned to Jonah's silent reaction, then cut back to Jasmine. It's not about me, she said. It's about who they're really targeting. Communities that show up when it matters. Voters who remember having to recite the Constitution just to get a ballot. She turned to camera 2, straight into it. This is not paranoia. This is a pattern. In homes across the country, people leaned in. The phones stopped buzzing. Dishes were left unwashed. Even skeptics sat still. In Kansas City, a 70-year-old man named Harold paused while feeding his dog. He'd never voted for a Democrat in his life. But something in Jasmine's tone, measured, not performative, made him listen. In Seattle, a teenage girl FaceTimed her grandmother and held the phone up to the screen. You need to see this, she whispered. Jonah changed the subject. Do you fear escalation? That the president may try to use legal force? Jasmine tilted her head. If I feared escalation, I wouldn't have gone live. I wouldn't be here tonight. What do you want to come from this? He asked. That question lingered. I want 3 things, she said after a pause. I want the executive order suspended. I want a bipartisan review of federal election oversight. And I want people to remember that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just makes space for louder threats. Jonah closed his notes. That was unusual. We reached out to the White House, he said. No comment. Jasmine smiled, just barely. Of course. After the commercial break, the producers aired a 3-minute community reel, snippets of the protests across the country, but the impact wasn't in the visuals. It was in the voices layered over the footage. A teacher from Fresno said, "My students watched her live stream in homeroom. That's civic education." A postal worker from Maine said, "I'm white, 65, and I'm telling you, this isn't just her fight." And finally, a woman from Jackson, Mississippi. I voted next to my mama in '94. We never missed an election. If they try to move my polling place, I'll walk 2 hours to get there. By the end of the broadcast, Jonah Frank's producers reported the second highest viewer engagement in the show's history. Only the post-9/11 episode had ever ranked higher. But it wasn't just TV numbers. That night, Senator Maxine Rell, a moderate conservative from Arizona, tweeted, "I may disagree with Representative Crockett on many issues, but jailing dissent is not who we are. I will not support this executive order." It was the first crack in the Republican bloc. Not a flood, but enough for people to notice. The next morning, Jasmine's inbox was overflowing again. Not with press inquiries, but with stories. Hundreds of them. Handwritten letters, scanned into PDFs. Photos of torn voter ID cards from the 60s. Notes from people who had never spoken up before. Patrice entered Jasmine's office holding a stack of papers held together with binder clips. "These are all from last night," she said. Jasmine took the first one and read it silently. After a minute, she folded it and placed it on the desk. "They're not writing to me," she said softly. "They're writing to the next person who's going to need this moment." But not everyone was moved. Some saw an opportunity to strike back harder, and the smear campaign was about to begin. They moved fast, and they moved ugly. Less than 24 hours after Jasmine's interview aired, the smear campaign began, quiet at first, like a whisper traveling through the walls. But by nightfall, it had taken full shape. A headline appeared on a fringe political site, Crockett funded by dark money PACs tied to extremists. The story had no named sources, no citations, and recycled screenshots from old campaign donations, legal, public, and already reported on years ago. But it didn't matter. The goal wasn't truth. It was volume. The headline spread like static through the internet. Soon, right-wing commentators were quoting the article as fact. A podcast host in Austin called her a professional agitator. A cable pundit from Nashville described her as a staged actor in a bigger play. On social media, cropped video clips twisted her words. One viral post paired her interview with out-of-context footage from a street protest she wasn't even present at. Inside her Dallas office, Jasmine scrolled through it all without speaking. Should we respond? Patrice asked, standing near her desk with arms crossed. Jasmine shook her head. Not yet. Let them empty the tank. Some of the attacks weren't digital. Someone spray-painted the word traitor across a billboard in her district featuring her face. In Raleigh, North Carolina, a conservative radio station spent an entire segment claiming her law license should be reviewed. A sheriff in Alabama said on Facebook that she should be investigated for threatening democracy. And then there were the messages. Go back to law school. You're not MLK, you're a fraud. We know where your office is. The last one triggered a call to Capitol Police. Security protocols were adjusted. Her staff began working in rotating shifts. At night, Jasmine's building remained lit, on purpose. No shadows, no guessing. But through it all, she refused to flinch. She returned emails. She reviewed draft legislation. She met with organizers. And she kept showing up in front of the camera, not to clap back, not to argue, but to speak. In one short clip posted on her official X account, she stared straight at the lens and said, "If I'm being attacked for reading the law, what does that say about the law? And what does it say about the people attacking me?" The clip gained 4 million views in under a day. Still, the narrative war raged on. Right-wing influencers latched onto every new angle. Her speaking fees, her past legal cases, even her outfits. One viral post zoomed in on her earrings during the Stateline Weekly interview and claimed they were symbols of extremist ideology. They weren't. They were from a Black-owned boutique in Baton Rouge. Jasmine laughed when Patrice showed her that one. "They're $18 hoops," she said. "The only thing extreme about them is the markup." But behind the humor was fatigue. "You're holding up better than I expected," Patrice admitted one afternoon as she brought her a thermos of soup. "I'm not doing this for comfort," Jasmine replied. "I'm doing it for clarity. The truth doesn't get tired." That evening, an unexpected letter arrived, handwritten in cursive on faded stationery. It was from Geneva Bryant, a 93-year-old woman in Savannah, Georgia. "When I was 22, I tried to register to vote, and they told me I couldn't read. I had memorized Article 1 of the Constitution. I stood there and recited it, word for word. They still turned me away. Don't stop, Jasmine. I see you." Jasmine kept that letter in her purse after that day. She took it everywhere. The tide began to shift again, quietly. A nonprofit in Milwaukee released a detailed breakdown of the misinformation being pushed online, line by line. A coalition of fact-checkers issued a joint report debunking 5 of the top stories targeting Jasmine. Civil rights attorneys began appearing on cable shows defending her character. But the moment that really turned, things came from an unlikely place. Senator Charles Brantley from South Dakota, staunchly conservative, veteran lawmaker, known for his strict party loyalty, appeared on a midday broadcast and surprised everyone. "I may disagree with Congresswoman Crockett's politics," he said, "but calling for her arrest because she read a federal order out loud? That's not how democracy works. If we start jailing dissent, we don't deserve the flag we salute." That clip played on loop for the next 6 hours. Inside the White House, aides went silent. Inside Jasmine's office, Patrice exhaled and said, "Well, that's one more than I expected." But what no one saw coming was the shift that would follow. A Republican breaking ranks was just the first crack in a dam about to burst. The text came at 6:42 a.m. Jasmine was already at her desk, hair wrapped, hoodie zipped, a chipped mug of green tea cooling beside her. She glanced at the screen, unknown number, Phoenix area code. It read, "For what it's worth, I believe you. You didn't just speak for your district, you spoke for the country. I'll make that clear today. M.R. R." She stared at it for a moment before passing the phone to Patrice. "Is this who I think it is?" Patrice squinted, scrolled up, then let out a quiet breath. "Senator Maxine Rell, Arizona, Republican, centrist, former prosecutor. She's got juice. What's her angle?" Patrice gave her a look. Maybe she just listened. Hours later, it hit the wires. Rell breaks with party, demands hold on voting order. Associated Press. AZ Senator challenges executive threat against Crockett. Reuters. Rell, we don't jail people for speaking. CNN. Cameras were already rolling when Senator Rell stepped up to a podium on the Senate lawn. No crowd, no stage lights, just a half circle of reporters and the steady Arizona heat. Her hair tied back, blazer simple, tone firm. I've reviewed the executive order in full. I've spoken with 3 constitutional lawyers, none of whom are activists, and I've watched Congresswoman Crockett's live stream and her interview. She paused, looking directly at the cameras. We don't agree on many issues, but I agree with her here. Voter suppression is un-American, and threatening someone with jail for stating that plainly is a line we should never cross. I won't support this order in its current form. She stepped away without answering questions. That single clip made it onto every network within the hour. By lunch, more Republican lawmakers started giving quiet interviews. Some hedged their language. Others were more direct. Senator Paulo Desmond of Nebraska, I have concerns about the enforcement mechanism. Congressman Eric Mears from Iowa, we're not in the business of punishing speech. Even a Fox News host, usually allergic to criticism of Trump, raised an eyebrow during a panel and said, "You know, folks, maybe we should have read the order more carefully." Inside the White House, a meeting had already been called. Chief Strategist Bennett Gorski slammed a printed copy of Rel's remarks on the table. This isn't a protest anymore. It's a narrative collapse. If one more senator turns, the order dies in the chamber. Press Secretary Dwight Reynolds paced near the window. We hold firm. Say the backlash proves the need for order. Say Crockett's stoking instability. Stoking instability? Snapped Gorski. She read from a document, Dwight. That's it. She read. This whole mess started because she had a highlighter. President Trump sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. We hold the line, he said. She wants a war. She'll get it. We push back harder. Mr. President, Rusk, the DOJ liaison, cut in. If you push harder now, you risk a full-blown internal investigation into the DOJ. The email she shared, I have word there's more, from more staff. Trump didn't answer. He just stared at the window, hands clenched together. Behind him, the TV screen ran B-roll of protests outside a courthouse in Topeka, Kansas. Find the leakers, he muttered. But that night, something new dropped. A journalist from the St. Paul Gazette published a story based on interviews with 2 unnamed federal employees. The article stated that internal DOJ communications had flagged Crockett weeks earlier, before she went public. One quote stood out. There was already concern she'd challenge the order. Pressure came from above to watch her social channels. That was it. One sentence. But it carried weight. News outlets pounced. Legal scholars started drawing parallels between Crockett's case and McCarthy-era intimidation. Civil rights groups prepared lawsuits. A whistleblower protection agency offered its services to Jasmine. In Phoenix, Senator Rel went a step further. She introduced a joint resolution to freeze implementation of the executive order pending congressional review. It wasn't expected to pass, but that wasn't the point. The resolution made it clear. This wasn't just one woman with a webcam anymore. It was a referendum on power. That evening, Jasmine walked a few quiet blocks in Oak Cliff, her old neighborhood. No cameras, no reporters, just familiar sidewalks and a few porch lights flickering on. A neighbor spotted her from a lawn chair. You all right, Ms. Crockett? She smiled gently. I'm fine, Mr. Gaines, just getting some air. You keep pushing, he said. You sound like my sister used to. She must have been a fighter, Jasmine said. She was, he nodded. They called her loud. She called herself clear. Jasmine chuckled softly, but as the resolution gained support, another shoe dropped, this time from the Department of Justice itself. They tried to bury the press release. No press conference, no podium, just a quiet PDF posted to the Department of Justice website at 11:37 p.m. Eastern, tucked between 2 unrelated updates, one about cybercrime, the other about a staffing shuffle. But the internet doesn't sleep. By 12:12 a.m., a law professor at Tulane posted the link with 3 words. This changes everything. The document was short, barely 6 paragraphs. But buried in the second one was a sentence no one expected to see in print. We acknowledge procedural lapses in the internal handling of communications surrounding the executive order on federal election protocols and will be conducting a formal inquiry into administrative messaging and interdepartmental pressure related to Representative Jasmine Crockett. By morning, it was front-page news. DOJ admits pressure, confirms review linked to Crockett dispute. The Boston Sentinel. White House claims backfire as DOJ concedes mistake. The Sacramento Daily, Crockett vindicated by internal DOJ review. Detroit Metro Journal. The legal implications were still murky. The DOJ hadn't declared the order unlawful, but it had cracked the door open. enough to confirm what Jasmine had been saying all along, that something inside the machine had gone wrong and someone had tried to cover it up. At 8:04 a.m., Jasmine went live again. She wore a soft green blouse this time, no makeup, just her voice. She didn't gloat, didn't throw blame. She sat still, looked straight into the camera, and said, "You saw it with your own eyes. The truth wasn't loud, but it was steady." She pulled out the original documents she had shown days earlier. This is the same order, the same memo, the same evidence. None of that changed. What changed is that enough of you paid attention. She paused, her voice growing firmer. We are not puppets of power, not props in someone's plan. We are citizens, and the Constitution wasn't written for decoration. It was written for moments exactly like this. Then she said nothing for 5 full seconds. The silence hit harder than any speech. Across the country, screens lit up with reactions. Teachers played the clip in civics classes. Ministers quoted her in Sunday sermons. A group of high school students in Des Moines reenacted her speech for a local youth film contest. Cable shows scrambled to pivot. Even the Frontline Ledger, a conservative publication known for sharp editorials, published a piece titled, "When the Government Blinks, Jasmine Crockett and the Power of Relentless Clarity." Inside the White House, frustration boiled into chaos. Gorski paced with his phone glued to his ear, barking at a comms assistant. Damage control now. We focus on moving forward. Pivot to the economy, border stuff, anything but Crockett. Reynolds, the press secretary, scribbled draft statements while the president stewed in silence. Nobody dared bring up the resolution Senator Rell had introduced because support was snowballing. By midday, 5 more lawmakers had signed on, including 2 swing state senators the administration desperately needed to hold. Worse still, internal DOJ whistleblowers had begun speaking with independent watchdog organizations. A formal congressional oversight hearing was already on the calendar for next week, and Jasmine, she was getting stronger. That afternoon, she hosted a community town hall in Dallas. No fanfare, folding chairs, bottled water. Local volunteers ran the mic. A man stood up, mid-60s, construction boots, face weathered from years of sun. "I ain't voted in 15 years, he said. "Figured nothing I do matters. But you made me feel like maybe it does." Jasmine looked at him gently. "It does," she said. "It always has. They just made it easy to forget." An 11-year-old girl stood next. Her voice shook. "My dad said we're going to go vote together next time. It's going to be my first time watching. I'm excited." Jasmine knelt beside her, smiling. "That's your right. Protect it with everything you've got." The next morning, the resolution to freeze the executive order officially reached the Senate floor. It was expected to fail, but it didn't. It passed 51 to 49. The chamber was quiet as the tally was read. Senator Rell stood, nodded once, and walked out. Reporters chased her for a quote. She offered only 5 words. Constitutional silence is still speech. Outside the Capitol, a small crowd stood behind barricades in the cold, listening on their phones. When the results were read, someone let out a whoop. Others clapped. A man raised his fist, not in anger, but in relief. And far away, in a kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, a woman sat with her 2 sons at the table, phones off, breakfast cooling in front of them. "You know who Crockett is?" she asked them. "Yeah," said the younger one. "She's the one who told the president no." She smiled. "She's the one who showed the country how." But Jasmine wasn't finished. Her next move would show that she wasn't just resisting power, she was ready to reshape it. The email was short, 1 sentence. "Are you interested in drafting a bipartisan framework for election reform?" It came from Senator Maxine Rell's office less than 48 hours after the Senate froze President Trump's executive order. Jasmine read it twice before calling Patrice into her office. "They're not bluffing," she said, tapping her screen. "This isn't a stunt." Patrice raised an eyebrow. "And if it is, then let them find out I know how to write law better than they do." They flew to Washington the next day. Behind closed doors inside a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Dirksen Senate office building, Jasmine met face-to-face with Rell and 2 other senators, 1 Democrat from Oregon, 1 Republican from Pennsylvania. There was no press, no handlers, just policy notes, water pitchers, and 4 legal minds working a whiteboard until it looked like calculus. Jasmine listened more than she spoke. But when she did speak, she didn't hedge. "We're not here to tweak the margins," she said. If we're going to fix something, it needs to be worth fixing. They started small: national early voting standards, clearer federal guidelines for polling relocations, transparency and redistricting efforts. It wasn't flashy. It wouldn't lead the evening news, but the potential was real. 2 weeks later, the draft was done. The Voter Integrity and Accessibility Framework, a 36-page document outlining bipartisan reforms designed to make future executive orders on elections subject to legislative review. The media expected fireworks. Instead, they got focus. Jasmine didn't hold a rally. She didn't issue a victory tweet. She hosted a Zoom call with high school civics students in 5 states. She read part of the bill out loud. Then she answered their questions one by one. Why didn't you sue the president? Because I wasn't after a courtroom win. I wanted the country to learn something. What if this bill fails? Then the next one won't, but it'll be stronger because we tried. What's next for you? More listening, less talking. Politics got loud because we stopped paying attention to people who whisper. Back in her district, things changed too. Voter registration surged. Local businesses displayed "Ask Me About My Ballot Plan" stickers. Churches hosted open-table discussions where people, many of whom had never voted, asked how to make their voices count. And Jasmine kept walking through it all: grocery stores, barbershops, high school gyms. She shook hands, but not for the cameras. When someone asked her how she won, she'd laugh. "This isn't winning," she'd say. "This is maintenance." In a quiet corner of the University of Wisconsin's law school, a professor used her live stream as a case study. He played the clip where she read the executive order line by line, pausing for discussion. His students broke it down like a legal brief, each clause, each pause, each intentional word. At the end of the class, one student raised her hand. She wasn't dramatic. She was just clear. "That's why it worked," the professor replied. "That's the power of understanding what you're up against and knowing your audience isn't enemies. It's neighbors." Months later, as the bill gained sponsors and hearings were scheduled, Jasmine stood in front of her childhood elementary school in Dallas. It was career day. The kids were sitting cross-legged on the cafeteria floor, fidgeting with name tags and paper badges. A little boy in the front row asked, "Are you famous now?" Jasmine smiled, crouching down to his level. "No," she said. "I just didn't let people lie in peace." The teacher laughed softly. Before leaving, Jasmine handed out pocket-sized constitutions to each student. Inside the cover, she had handwritten a simple message: "This belongs to you. Read it loud. Keep it close." Later that night, Patrice sat across from her in the office. "So what happens if the bill doesn't pass?" Jasmine leaned back in her chair, eyes tired but sharp. "Then we'll write another one, and another after that, until the ground gets tired of shifting beneath us." She paused, then added quietly, "I didn't come here to be a headline. I came to make sure the next girl doesn't have to live stream her defense just to stay in office." And with that, the story, one that started with a public threat and grew into a national reckoning, settled into something deeper, something lasting. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just survived a political attack. She'd used it to light a path, not for herself, for everyone watching. If this story made you think, if it reminded you why your voice matters, subscribe and share it. Because silence protects no one. Truth only grows when it's spoken.